The moment the proctor calls my name, the entire hall bursts out laughing. Not polite laughing, not nervous laughing, the kind of laughing where 300 students point at the giant crystal screen above the arena floor. Because right next to my name, in glowing red numbers, it says 0.9. 0.9 out of 100. I'm standing in the middle of the Ascension trial, the one test that decides whether I get to stay at Blackthorn Academy or get shipped home in disgrace, and my core output reads lower than a first-year child's practice wand. Someone in the crowd yells, "Is that a typo?" It's not a typo. I freeze on the platform, sweat sliding down my neck, while the boy standing across from me, my assigned opponent for the trial, cracks his knuckles and grins like he just won the lottery. His name is Draven Ashcombe, heir to one of the top-ranking families in the Empire, and his number on the board reads 74.2. Not the highest in our year, just high enough to make what happens next completely one-sided. "Don't worry, Ren," he says, loud enough for the whole arena to hear. "I'll go easy on you. Maybe." He doesn't go easy on me. The proctor barely finishes shouting "Begin" before Draven's fist slams into my ribs so hard I feel something crack, and I'm airborne, tumbling across the stone floor, while the crowd cheers like they just watched their favorite gladiator finish a warm-up round. I try to stand. My legs won't listen. Somewhere above me, faces blur into a wall of pointing fingers and mocking laughter, and one thought loops through my head on repeat. This is the day everyone finds out I don't belong here. What none of them know, what I don't even fully understand yet, is that in exactly 6 hours, while every single one of them is asleep in their dormitory beds, dreaming about tomorrow's breakfast, I'm going to be standing at the base of a black tower that stretches into a starless sky, covered in blood that isn't mine, staring down a monster 3 times my size. And when I wake up, my number on that crystal screen is not going to say 0.9 anymore. That's the part nobody at Blackthorn knows about me. That's the part that's about to ruin everyone's assumptions, one dream at a time. My name is Ren Kaldor, and until 3 months ago, I was exactly what everyone thought I was. The weakest student in a school built entirely around strength. Blackthorn Academy doesn't accept weak students by accident. It exists because the Empire discovered, 2 centuries ago, that a rare fraction of humanity is born with something called a core, an inner well of power that lets a person bend the world around them, throw fire from bare palms, move faster than sound, tear through steel with their hands. Every noble family fights to have core-strong children. Every school ranks its students by exact numeric output, because in this world, your number is your worth. It decides your future, your marriage prospects, your military rank, whether you live in a mansion or a gutter. My number was supposed to be 0. That's what the healers told my older sister Yuna the day they tested me as a child, right after our parents died in a core beast attack on our home village. 0 output. A dead husk wearing a human face. Most families would have abandoned a child like that. Yuna didn't. She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, and every night, before I fell asleep, she'd whisper the same thing to me. "You're not broken, Ren. You're just quiet. Some things take longer to wake up." I didn't believe her for 12 years. Then, 3 months ago, everything changed in a single night, and I still don't fully understand why. It started with a headache so bad I thought my skull was splitting in half. I remember collapsing onto my dorm bed, vision swimming, and then nothing. Or at least, nothing that felt like nothing. One second I was staring at the cracked ceiling of my dormitory room, and the next I was standing on cold black stone, under a sky with no stars, no moon, just endless dark pressing down like a lid on a box. In front of me rose a tower, not a normal tower, a tower built from something that looked like obsidian and screamed, actually screamed, low and constant, like it was alive and in pain. Words appeared in front of my eyes, glowing faint silver, like something only I could see. "Welcome, vessel. The Somnium Throne has chosen you. Enter the tower, survive, grow, return." I thought I was losing my mind. I thought grief and stress, and a decade of being the weakest person in every room, had finally broken something behind my eyes. Then a shape moved at the base of the tower, something with too many joints, skin like wet leather, eyes that glowed the same silver as the words, and it lunged at me with a speed that should have killed me instantly. I didn't die. I don't know how, but my body moved on its own, some instinct buried so deep I didn't know it existed, and I dodged. Barely. The creature's claw missed my throat by a hair, and rage and terror exploded through my chest at the exact same moment, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt something wake up inside me. A pulse, a pressure, like a locked door deep in my ribs had finally cracked open. I fought that thing with my bare hands for what felt like an hour, screaming, bleeding, absolutely certain I was about to die in a nightmare that somehow hurt like reality. And when I finally landed a killing blow, pure luck, pure desperation, silver text bloomed in front of my eyes again. First trial cleared, dream level 1 achieved, converting to waking core output at 100 times standard rate, rest now. Then I woke up in my dorm bed, drenched in sweat, my hands shaking, and my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked my palms for blood. There wasn't any. I checked the clock. Only 40 minutes had passed, but something in my chest felt different, heavier, fuller, like a glass that had been empty my whole life had just been filled a quarter of the way for the first time. The next morning, during a routine core scanning class, my number came back as 4.2, 4 times what it had been the day before. Nobody noticed because 4 is still laughably weak by Blackthorn standards, still a punchline, still enough to get me shoved into lockers and mocked in the hallway by kids like Draven Ashcombe. But I noticed. I stared at that number for a full minute in complete silence, while my classmates moved on to more interesting things, like betting on whose core would rank highest by graduation. I didn't tell anyone. Not my roommate, not my sister, not the one friend I actually had at that miserable school. A scrawny, motor-mouthed kid named Milo Farrow, who'd been assigned to bunk with me on the first day, and for reasons I still don't fully understand, decided sticking with the weakest kid at Blackthorn was a good use of his time. I told nobody, because I didn't understand what had happened, and because some instinct in me, the same instinct that had made me dodge that first monster, told me to keep my mouth shut and wait. That instinct was right, because the next night, the exact same thing happened again. The tower was still there when I closed my eyes. Taller this time. Or maybe I'd just climbed one level higher without realizing it. Because the ground floor I'd fought on the first night was gone, replaced by a narrow stone stairwell spiraling upward into darkness. Another creature waited at the top of the first flight, uglier than the last one, faster, hungrier. I fought it with fists that remembered muscle memory from the fight before, even though my waking body had never thrown a real punch in its life. Somehow, in that dream, I already knew how to move. Dream level 2 achieved, converting to waking core output at 100 times standard rate. By the end of the first week, I was quietly, secretly, sitting at a core output of 31. By the end of the second week, it was past 60, and I had told exactly 0 people. Because a number that high, appearing out of nowhere on a kid the entire academy had written off as a hopeless husk, was the kind of thing that gets you dragged into an office for interrogation, or worse, gets you noticed by families like the Ashcombes, who do not appreciate surprises that threaten their standing. So I did something that, looking back, was either the smartest or the stupidest decision of my life. I faked it. Every single day, I made sure my public core readings stayed artificially suppressed, just above 0, just enough to avoid getting expelled, while my real number climbed and climbed in secret behind the scenes. I learned to control the suppression the same way I'd learned to fight in my dreams, through repetition, through pain, through nights spent clawing my way up a tower that seemed to have no end. Which brings us back to the Ascension trial, the one where I let Draven Ashcombe throw me across the arena floor in front of the entire student body, because if I fought back with even a fraction of what I actually had, I would have exposed everything 3 months too early. I lay there on the stone floor, ribs screaming, listening to Draven's friends cheer his name, listening to a girl near the front row, a girl I'd been quietly, uselessly in love with since our first semester, a girl named Sarah Wintermore, who ranked in the Academy's top 5 and had never once looked at me like I existed, laugh along with everyone else. Not unkindly, just the way you laugh at something you assume is harmless. That laugh hurt more than the punch. "Get up," the proctor said, bored, already writing my failing grade into the official record. I got up. Draven smirked, already turning to walk away, already treating the fight as finished business. Because why wouldn't he? I was a 0.9. There was nothing left to prove. "Match isn't over," I said. The words came out of my mouth before I fully decided to say them. I don't know what made me do it. Maybe it was Sarah's laugh. Maybe it was 3 months of secretly bleeding in a nightmare tower every single night while pretending to be nothing during the day. Maybe I was just tired of being the punchline. Whatever it was, the entire arena went quiet because nobody, not once in Blackthorn's history, had ever heard a 0.9 output student tell a top-ranked opponent the match wasn't finished. Draven turned around slowly, more amused than angry. "You want more?" I didn't answer. I let my suppression drop. Just a fraction, just enough. The crystal screen above the arena flickered, recalculated, and the number next to my name jumped from 0.9 to 68. Someone in the crowd screamed. Draven's smirk vanished so fast it was almost funny. Before he could process what he was looking at, I closed the distance between us in a single step, moving with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for a body that had spent 12 years being called a husk, and drove my fist into his stomach with every ounce of rage and humiliation I'd swallowed for 3 straight months. He doubled over, gasping, and the entire arena, 300 students, a dozen instructors, the proctor holding his clipboard, stared at me in dead silence, like they were watching the laws of the world quietly rewrite themselves in real time. I had no idea, standing there with my knuckles still stinging, that this single moment, one punch, one number flip on a crystal screen, was about to unravel everything. Not just for me, for Draven's family, for Sarah, for the secret I'd been keeping, for the tower I climbed every single night while the rest of the world slept. Because what none of us understood yet, not even me, was that the tower wasn't a coincidence, and it definitely wasn't random. Someone had put it there on purpose, and they had chosen me for a reason nobody at Blackthorn was ready to hear. Draven staggered upright, blood at the corner of his mouth, staring at me like I'd personally insulted every ancestor in his bloodline. That's impossible. You're a 0. You've always been a 0. "Guess I leveled up," I said, and honestly, even I was a little surprised at how calm my voice sounded. The proctor actually dropped his clipboard. Word spreads fast at a school built entirely around ranking people by numbers, and by the time I made it back to my dormitory that evening, half the academy had already heard some exaggerated version of the story, that the Husk kid had broken Draven Ashcomb's ribs, that his core had spiked overnight from nothing to nearly 70, that the healers were demanding a full recheck of his file. Milo practically tackled me the second I walked through our door. "You're insane," he said, eyes wide, gripping my shoulders like he needed to check I was actually real. "You're actually insane. Do you know what people are saying? They're saying you cheated. They're saying you stole a core crystal. They're saying—" He stopped, studying my face. "Wait, you didn't cheat, did you?" "No." "Then what happened? Ren, what happened?" I almost told him everything right there. The tower, the monsters, the silver words, the strange voice that called itself the Somnium Throne. But some instinct, that same quiet, careful instinct that had kept me hiding my real number for 3 months, told me to wait just a little longer. So instead I told him half the truth, that something had changed, that I didn't fully understand it yet, that I needed him to trust me a little while longer. Milo, to his credit, didn't push. He just exhaled, sat down hard on his bed and said, "Well, whatever it is, I'm glad it's finally your turn to win something." That night, when I closed my eyes, the tower was waiting for me exactly where I'd left it, and for the first time since this had all started, I noticed something new carved into the black stone at the base of the stairwell. Words that hadn't been there before, words that made my stomach drop. 31st floor. Caution. A rival vessel approaches. I had no idea what a rival vessel meant. I was about to find out the hard way, because standing at the top of the next flight of stairs wasn't a monster this time. It was a person. A boy about my age, dressed in tattered dark robes, with silver eyes exactly like the glowing text that had greeted me on my very first night in this place. He looked at me the way a predator looks at something it's already decided to eat. "Another one," he said, voice flat, almost bored. "The throne keeps waking up more of you. Fine. I'll just have to thin the herd." He lunged before I could ask a single question, and for the first time since I'd started climbing this tower, I understood, with complete and total clarity, that I was not the only person in the world who had been chosen. And whoever this boy was, he had clearly been climbing a lot longer than 3 months. I barely survived that fight. I want to be honest about that, because up until that point, every battle inside the tower had felt like a brutal but winnable trial. Hard enough to hurt, hard enough to terrify me, but never hard enough to make me believe I might actually die. This was different. This boy moved like he'd already fought 1,000 versions of me and won every single time. He caught my first swing without even looking at it, twisted my arm until something in my shoulder screamed, and slammed me into the stone floor hard enough to crack the tile beneath me. "Pathetic," he muttered, standing over me. "The throne really is getting desperate." Lying there, half-conscious, staring up at a boy who could apparently read my exhaustion like an open book, I felt that same locked door in my chest rattle again, the same pressure that had woken up during my very first fight in this tower. Except this time, it wasn't just cracking open, it was tearing off its hinges. Silver light exploded from my chest, so bright the boy actually flinched and stumbled back a step, shielding his eyes. New words bloomed in the air above me, different from anything I'd seen before, written not in plain silver, but in something that pulsed like a heartbeat. Hidden claws unlocked, bloodline resonance. The vessel carries an unbroken throne line. Adaptive growth accelerated. I didn't understand what any of that meant in the moment. All I knew was that my body suddenly moved faster than it had any right to, faster than the pain in my shoulder should have allowed, and I was back on my feet before the rival boy could recover his footing. For the first time in the entire fight, his expression shifted from bored superiority to something closer to alarm. "That's not possible," he said, backing up a step. "That clause hasn't triggered in generations. Who are you?" "Ren Kaldor," I said, and swung. I didn't win that fight outright. He escaped through some kind of shimmering rift before I could land a finishing blow, vanishing with a parting sentence that I would spend the rest of that week turning over in my head. The throne chose wrong this time. When I tell the others what you are, they won't let you keep climbing quietly. I woke up in my dorm room gasping, drenched in sweat, my shoulder throbbing exactly where the rival boy had wrenched it, even though nothing had physically touched me while I slept. That was new. Painful proof that whatever was happening inside that tower wasn't just a dream anymore. It was bleeding into reality, and reality was about to start bleeding back. The Academy's core rankings get updated publicly every Friday, displayed on a massive floating crystal board in the central courtyard, where every single student can see exactly where they stand against everyone else. That Friday, 3 days after my fight with Draven, my name appeared in a spot it had never once occupied in my entire time at Blackthorn. Rank 41 out of 300. The courtyard went completely silent, then erupted into chaos. Whispers, accusations, a few students actually walking up to the board and tapping it like they expected the number to glitch and fix itself. Draven stood near the front of the crowd, arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the board like it had personally betrayed him, and standing a few feet away from him, close enough that I could see the exact moment her expression shifted from disbelief to something I couldn't quite name, was Sarah Wintermore. She looked at the board, then she looked at me. For the first time in 3 semesters, Sarah Wintermore actually looked at me like I was a person worth looking at. "Kaldor," she said, walking over, ignoring the way half the courtyard turned to watch. "Rank 41. 3 days ago, you were a rounding error." "Things change," I said, trying very hard to sound like a person who wasn't internally panicking about being the center of attention for the first time in his life. She studied me for a long moment, the kind of stare that felt like it was peeling back skin to check what was underneath. "There's something you're not telling anyone." It wasn't a question. I didn't answer it like one. "Careful," Draven called out, stepping closer, voice dripping with the kind of contempt that comes from someone who's never once had to question his own place in the world. "Whatever trick he's using, the Ashcombe family has already filed a formal review with the Academy Council. Cheaters get expelled, Kaldor. Enjoy your 41st place ranking while it lasts." He said it loud enough for the whole courtyard to hear, clearly hoping to turn public opinion against me before anyone got too curious about what had actually happened. It worked, at least partially. I could feel the whispers shift, the suspicious glances multiply, the easy assumption that a nobody like me climbing 40 ranks in 3 days had to be some kind of fraud. What Draven didn't know, what none of them knew, was that his formal review was about to force open a door I had been desperately trying to keep shut. Because the Academy Council doesn't investigate cheating accusations with paperwork. They investigate them with a core verification ritual, an ancient magical process that strips away every ounce of suppression a student might be using and displays their absolute, unfiltered output for the entire council to witness in person. I had exactly 6 days before that ritual would drag my secret into the light whether I was ready or not. 6 days, and one tower that kept getting taller every single night. I spent that week living 2 completely different lives stitched together by exhaustion. During the day, I sat through classes pretending to be a mediocre student, slowly clawing his way up the rankings through hard work and lucky breaks, dodging questions from curious classmates and hostile glances from Draven's circle of friends. At night, I climbed. Floor after floor, fight after fight, each one harder than the last, each one leaving new bruises on a body that woke up sore in ways it had no right to be. Milo started noticing the bruises. "Ren, are you sleepwalking into walls or something? You've got a mark on your ribs that looks exactly like a fist." "Training accident," I lied, badly. He didn't push, but I caught him watching me more carefully after that. The way you watch a friend you suspect is hiding something serious. I hated lying to him. He was the only person at that school who'd treated me like a human being before any of this started. Back when my number was still a joke, and there was nothing to gain from being kind to me. But I still wasn't ready to explain a tower that only I could see, a bloodline clause I didn't understand, and a rival vessel who'd promised to bring the others once he told them what I was. On the 4th night, I found out exactly what he meant by the others. I climbed to what the tower's carved stone announced as the 35th floor, and instead of a single monster or a single rival waiting for me, there were 3. 3 figures in the same tattered dark robes, silver eyes glowing in perfect unison, standing in a loose triangle formation like they'd rehearsed this exact ambush. The rival boy from before stood at the center, arms crossed, smiling for the first time since I'd met him. "Told you I'd bring the others," he said. "This is Mira." He nodded toward a girl with a scar running down one side of her face, knives already spinning idly between her fingers. "And this is Ossian." A taller boy, silent, radiating the kind of stillness that felt more dangerous than any amount of posturing. "We don't usually do this. Vessels aren't supposed to interfere with each other's trials, but bloodline clauses like yours have a nasty habit of destabilizing the whole throne if they're allowed to keep growing unchecked. So," he rolled his shoulders, "we're going to end this early. Nothing personal. 3 against 1. On my 4th night ever fighting inside that tower at anything beyond a beginner's pace, I remember thinking, with a strange kind of clarity that only shows up right before something terrible happens, that I was probably about to die in a dream that had somehow made itself capable of killing me for real. Mira moved first, blades flashing, faster than anything I'd faced before. I barely dodged the first strike, felt the second one open a shallow line across my forearm, hot and immediate, and understood in that instant that pain in this tower was not a metaphor. Ossian came next, silent and enormous. A fist like a falling boulder that I only avoided because some instinct screamed at me to drop flat a half-second before impact, the stone floor cratering where my head had been a moment earlier. I was losing, badly, and somewhere in the back of my mind, past the fear and the adrenaline, a small, ugly voice whispered that maybe this was always how it was going to end, that a kid who spent 12 years as a zero was never meant to survive a fight against 3 people who'd clearly been doing this for years. That's when the pressure in my chest cracked open again, not gently this time, violently. Silver light poured out of every wound on my body, like the blood itself had turned to something else entirely, and new words detonated across my vision in letters so large they blotted out the 3 figures standing in front of me. Full bloodline awakening triggered. The last Throneborn has been challenged. Responding. I don't fully remember the next 30 seconds. I remember Mira's blades shattering against something that wrapped around my arms like armor made of pure light. I remember Ossian's fist stopping dead an inch from my face, frozen in place like time itself had slammed on the brakes just for him. I remember the rival boy, the one who'd started all of this, taking one look at whatever had just happened to me, and doing something I never expected from someone so confident a moment earlier. He ran. Not a retreat, not a tactical withdrawal, a full, undignified sprint toward the nearest shimmering rift, dragging Mira and a frozen, stumbling Ossian along with him, shouting something back over his shoulder that I only caught half of through the ringing in my ears. Not supposed to be possible. Tell the council. The last throne is awake. Then the rift snapped shut, and I was alone on the 35th floor, chest heaving, silver light fading from my skin, staring at words hanging in the air that I would spend the rest of that week trying to understand. Vessel designation updated. Last Throneborn. Welcome home, Ren Kaldor. I woke up in my dorm room at 4 in the morning, completely drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling while my heart tried to climb out of my chest. Last Throneborn. Whatever that meant, it had been enough to make 3 seasoned tower vessels turn and run for their lives. It had been enough to make the entire structure of the dream itself bend around me, like the tower recognized something in my blood that even I didn't know was there. I thought about calling my sister. Yuna had always been the one person who believed something was hiding inside me, long before there was any evidence to support it, and some part of me desperately wanted to hear her voice. Wanted to tell her she'd been right all along. But it was 4 in the morning, and she worked brutal early shifts at the healing ward in our home district, and I didn't want to scare her awake with a story that would sound, out loud, exactly like the ravings of someone losing their mind. Instead, I lay there until sunrise, running through everything that had happened, piecing together a theory that felt insane even as I built it. My parents had died when a core beast attacked our village. Everyone always told me my zero output meant I was broken, an anomaly, a dead branch on an otherwise healthy family tree. What if it was the opposite? What if I wasn't broken at all? What if my core had never been zero, just locked, sealed, waiting for something specific to trigger it, the same way the tower had been waiting for me long before I ever knew it existed? The core verification ritual was 2 days away, and for the first time since Draven filed his formal accusation, I found myself actually looking forward to it. Because whatever secret the Academy Council was expecting to expose, I was starting to suspect it was going to be a lot stranger, and a lot bigger than a simple cheating scandal. The morning of the ritual, the entire Academy gathered in the Grand Verification Hall, an ancient circular chamber with a ceiling carved into the shape of a starburst, ringed by 12 council seats occupied by the highest-ranking instructors in the school. Draven sat near the front with his family's personal advocate, practically vibrating with satisfaction, certain he was about to watch me publicly exposed and expelled in front of everyone who mattered. Sarah sat a few rows back, arms crossed, watching me with an expression I still couldn't quite read. Milo sat closer, chewing on his own thumbnail, looking more nervous than I felt. Ren Kaldor, the council chair announced, an older woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of voice that had clearly silenced 1,000 unruly students over the decades. Step forward. The verification ritual will now begin. I stepped into the center circle, where an enormous crystal pillar rose from the floor, humming faintly with restrained magical pressure. The chair raised one hand, and threads of golden light spilled out from the pillar, wrapping around my body, seeking out every ounce of suppression I'd been quietly maintaining for 3 months, preparing to strip it all away in one merciless pull. This ritual reads absolute core output, the chair explained to the room, more for dramatic effect than genuine necessity, since everyone already knew exactly how it worked. There is no suppression that can survive it. Whatever Ren Kaldor's true number is, we are all about to see it. The golden threads tightened. I felt every wall I'd built over 3 months collapse at once. And the sensation wasn't painful exactly. It was more like being unzipped from the inside, every hidden piece of myself pulled into the open with nowhere left to hide. The crystal pillar shuddered. The numbers on the display above it began climbing so fast they blurred, and the golden light spilling from the ritual turned from soft, warm gold into a blinding, furious silver that made half the council members shield their eyes. The chair's composed expression cracked for the first time in what I imagined was a very long career. That's not possible, she whispered, staring at numbers that had climbed past anything she'd ever personally verified. Recalibrate the pillar, it must be malfunctioning. It wasn't malfunctioning. When the light finally died down and the numbers stopped climbing, the display hanging above the crystal pillar read a number that made the entire grand verification hall fall into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off the domed ceiling. Not 41, not 68, 347, a number that didn't just outrank every single student in the room, it outranked every instructor sitting on the council, every senior graduate the Academy had produced in a decade, every recorded figure in Blackthorn's official history except for a handful of names reserved for legendary heroes from centuries past. Draven's advocate stood up so fast his chair clattered backward. This is fraud. This has to be fraud. No suppression method exists that could hide a number that large. There is no fraud, the chair said slowly, still staring at the display like she expected it to blink and correct itself. I have personally verified this ritual for 30 years. It cannot be faked. Ren Kaldor's core output is genuinely, verifiably, 347. She turned to look at me, and for the first time since I'd arrived at that school, an instructor looked at me like I was something worth being afraid of. The only question left is how a student with a documented history of zero output for 12 years achieved this in the span of 3 months. I had no idea, standing there under the weight of every eye in that hall, that my answer to her next question was about to change the entire trajectory of my life, expose me to forces far more dangerous than a jealous classmate and a formal cheating accusation, and drag me directly into a conflict that had apparently been simmering behind the scenes since long before I was born. Because when I opened my mouth to explain about the tower, the silver text, the bloodline clause, and the words, "Last Throneborn," the entire council chamber went so quiet you could hear the crystal pillar humming, and one of the 12 council members, an old man who had said nothing throughout the entire proceedings, rose slowly from his seat with an expression of pure, unfiltered shock. "Say that name again," he said, voice shaking. The exact phrase the tower used. "Last Throneborn," I repeated, confused. "Why? What does it mean?" The old man sat back down heavily, pale as a sheet, and for a long moment, he didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had dropped to barely more than a whisper, but in that silent hall, everyone heard him perfectly. "It means the Empire has spent 200 years hunting for something they thought was extinct, and it means, Mr. Kaldor, that starting today, there are people far more dangerous than a disgruntled classmate who are going to want to know exactly where you sleep at night." I should have been terrified by that sentence. Honestly, some part of me was. But standing in that hall, staring at a number that finally, after 12 years of being called broken, proved my sister right, I mostly just felt one thing rising up through the fear. I couldn't wait to see how much higher that tower could take me. The hall didn't stay quiet for long. The second the old council member sat back down, the 12 seats erupted into overlapping arguments, half the council shouting about protocol, the other half shouting about danger, and none of them agreeing on a single thing, except that whatever had just happened could not, under any circumstances, leave that room the way it had entered it. The chair had to slam her staff against the floor twice just to get the noise to drop back below a roar. "Silence," she said, and this time even the loudest voices obeyed. "Whatever Mr. Kaldor is, we will not decide his fate through shouting. This session is closed. Every student who is not directly involved will leave this hall immediately." Draven didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at the number still glowing above the crystal pillar, like if he looked at it long enough, it would finally start making sense. His advocate had to physically pull him toward the exit, muttering something about damage control, about needing to speak with his father before the story spread any further. For the first time since I'd met him, Draven Ashcombe looked less like a bully and more like a kid who'd just watched the ground shift under his entire understanding of the world. Milo lingered near the doorway longer than he was supposed to, catching my eye across the emptying hall, mouthing a single question I could read perfectly, even from a distance. "What is happening to you?" I didn't have an answer he'd believe yet, so I just shook my head slightly, a promise to explain later, and watched him get herded out with the rest of the crowd. Sarah didn't get herded out. She walked straight past two instructors trying to clear the room, planted herself a few feet from where I stood in the center circle, and crossed her arms like she had every right to be there. Nobody stopped her. I got the distinct impression that very few people ever successfully stopped Sarah Wintermore from doing anything she'd already decided to do. 347, she said quietly, once the hall had mostly emptied. 3 days ago, you were 41 places behind me. Now you're not just ahead of me, you're ahead of everyone who's ever attended this school. I noticed, I said. You don't sound very excited about it. I'm still trying to figure out if I should be excited or terrified. Apparently there's a secret organization that might already be interested in me, and I only found that out about 4 minutes ago. Something in her expression softened, just slightly, like she was recalculating an opinion she'd held about me for a very long time. My family has old ties to throne research. I've heard the phrase, "last throne born," exactly once before, whispered by my grandmother right before she told me never to repeat it to anyone outside our bloodline. I didn't understand it then. I think I'm starting to understand it now. She hesitated, then added, quieter, "Whatever you're carrying, Kaldor, you shouldn't carry it alone. I'm not saying that to be kind. I'm saying it because I think it's true." I didn't know what to say to that, so for a few seconds I said nothing at all, and she seemed content to let the silence sit there between us, instead of filling it with something easier. The old council member, the one who'd gone pale the moment I said the tower's phrase out loud, approached last, waiting until the chair was occupied with a cluster of anxious instructors before speaking to me directly, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear it. "My name is Instructor Voss," he said. "I have spent 40 years of my life researching the Somnium War, and I want you to understand something clearly, Mr. Kaldor, because very few people left alive will tell you the truth about this. The Empire did not lose the throne-born line to bad luck or natural extinction. They lost it because someone hunted it to near zero on purpose 2 centuries ago and buried the reason so deep that even sitting on this council, I only know fragments." He glanced toward the hall's exit, lowering his voice further. "If that tower called you last throne-born, it means whoever did the hunting 200 years ago failed to finish the job. And people who fail to finish jobs like that tend not to appreciate loose ends turning up alive." "Are you telling me to run?" I asked. "I'm telling you to be careful who you trust, and to keep climbing," he said. "Whatever waits at the top of that tower, it chose you specifically." I don't believe that was an accident, and neither should you. He left before I could ask anything else. Footsteps unhurried despite everything he'd just told me. And I stood alone in the center of the grand verification hall for a long moment, staring up at a crystal pillar still faintly humming with residual silver light, trying to process the fact that in the span of one single afternoon, I had gone from a rumor of a cheating scandal to a 200-year-old mystery the empire itself had apparently spent generations trying to bury. By the time I made it back to the dormitory that evening, the entire hallway went quiet the second I stepped through the door, a dozen students freezing mid-conversation to stare at me like I'd grown a second head. Word had already spread past exaggeration into full mythology. Some versions had my number at 400. Some had the entire council fainting. One particularly creative rumor claimed I'd shattered the verification pillar entirely with raw output. Milo was waiting inside our room, arms crossed, doing a poor job of pretending he wasn't furious. 347, he said the moment the door clicked shut behind me. You've been sitting 3 feet away from me every single night for 3 months, Ren. 347, and you didn't say a single word. I didn't know how to say it, I admitted. I still don't, honestly. I'm not even sure I believe it myself. Try, he said, because I've been covering for you every time you woke up with a new bruise, telling everyone you were clumsy, telling myself you were just going through something. I'd rather know the truth, even if the truth sounds insane. So I told him, all of it. The tower, the silver words, the rival vessels, the bloodline clause, Instructor Voss's warning about a 200-year-old hunt that never quite finished. Milo listened without interrupting once, which, for Milo, was practically a miracle, and by the time I finished, his earlier anger had drained into something closer to stunned, quiet awe. So every night, he said slowly, while I'm asleep 3 feet away from you, snoring, completely unaware, you're climbing a nightmare tower and fighting things that could actually kill you. Pretty much. That's the single coolest and most terrifying thing I have ever heard in my entire life, he said, and then, after a beat, you're still an idiot for not telling me sooner. Probably. But I've got your back, he added, quieter now, all the earlier frustration gone from his voice. Whatever this hollow choir thing turns out to be, whatever this throne-born business actually means, you're not doing it alone. I don't have a core worth mentioning, but I've got a library card and a stubborn streak, and apparently that's about to become useful. Because if 3 months had turned me from a 0 into the strongest student in Blackthorn's recorded history, I had absolutely no intention of stopping there. And judging by the look on Instructor Voss's face, whatever the Somnium Throne actually was, and whatever last Throneborn actually meant, my quiet nights in that endless black tower were about to become a lot less quiet, and a lot more dangerous than anything I had faced so far. I barely slept that night, not because I was afraid, but because for the first time since this whole thing started, I wasn't dreading what waited for me on the other side of closing my eyes. I lay in the dark listening to Milo's breathing even out across the room, thinking about Instructor Voss's warning, thinking about the way Sarah had looked at me in that emptying hall, thinking about a 200-year-old hunt that had apparently never finished its job. Somewhere out there, an organization calling itself the Hollow Choir already knew my name, or was about to. Somewhere out there, whatever had wiped out the Throneborn line generations ago was still active enough to make a council instructor go pale just hearing the phrase out loud. 12 years ago, I had been the boy healers labeled a dead husk, the boy my own extended relatives quietly avoided at family gatherings because a child with a 0 core was, in the Empire's eyes, barely worth the cost of raising. 12 years of locker slams and mocking laughter, and a number on a screen that told the entire world exactly how little I mattered. And somewhere in the middle of all that, my sister Yuna had kept whispering the same 4 words to me every single night, long after most people would have stopped believing them. Some things take longer to wake up. She had no idea how right she was. She still didn't know, actually. I hadn't found the words yet to explain any of this to her, hadn't found a way to call her without sounding like grief and exhaustion had finally cracked something loose in my head. But lying there in the dark, replaying the number 347 glowing above that crystal pillar, I promised myself I'd tell her soon. She deserved to know that the zero she refused to give up on had turned into something the Empire itself was apparently terrified of. That night, when I closed my eyes, the tower looked different, taller, darker, and carved fresh into the stone at the base of the stairs, in letters that glowed brighter than anything I'd seen before, were 4 words that told me my simple life of secretly leveling up while everyone else slept was officially, permanently over. The throne remembers you now.